Welcome everyone. I'm Mark Fox, CEO of NetEvents, and delighted you can join us here today for the Branch of One and the new Enterprise Edge. This session will be chaired by Brandon Butler, Senior Research Analyst of Enterprise Networks at IDC. And on the line now we have press from all around Europe and North America, so delighted to welcome the press and hand over to Brandon to chair this session. Brandon, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. And I want to say thanks to everyone for joining us here today. And I want to say a special thank you to all of our esteemed panelists who will be joining us today. My name is Brandon Butler. I'm a senior research analyst for Enterprise Networks at IDC. I cover how organizations deploy and manage their networks. And one of the key topic areas that I've been researching over the last year and a half has been how those enterprises and organizations have been looking to support remote workers, which is what we call the Branch of One. And so that's what we're going to be speaking about today. And I have a great set of panelists to speak with me about that. So joining me today are Samantha Davis, who is the Chief Information Officer of the Americas for Arkema, Mark Parr, Global Director of Information Technology at HFW, Gaurav Anand, the board member at Tata Communications America Incorporated, and Ian Wood, Head of Technology for UK and Ireland for Veritas. And so with that, let me start by giving a brief overview of how I've been thinking about the Branch of One topic. And as I said, this has been a key research area for us at IDC, and I'm really happy to share my thoughts and then hear the thoughts of our end users and vendors, folks who can give us a sort of boots on the ground perspective of this as well. So let's get started. So this is a slide that we talk about flattening the curve, and we heard a lot about flattening the curve as it related to the pandemic from a public health perspective because of COVID, obviously. We have thought about flattening the curve from a technology perspective at IDC. And this chart shows the different business focus that we saw organizations going through in the COVID era. And then that matches with the economic situation at the bottom of the chart. And so this is basically saying that in the early days of the pandemic last year, we saw that organizations were focused on business continuity and cost optimization. And now, as organizations are thinking about their future enterprise and the next normal, sort of what their long-term strategy is going to look like, they're looking to make targeted investments to get to that future enterprise state, to that next normal state. And the point is that technology can be something that can help organizations accelerate their transition through this curve, through this process, and it can help organizations ensure resiliency, to enable agility, to overcome some of the business continuity and cost optimization challenges that they have. And we really see now that organizations are at a point where they're looking to make targeted investments in technology for their own enterprise, for supporting remote workers, for supporting a hybrid workforce. And that's going to be one of the keys that we're going to talk about today. What are some of those technology challenges that these organizations have, and how are we using technology to overcome them? So as we move on here, another topic I wanted to discuss was what we talk about, the future of connectedness. And fundamentally, this is about how networks work. And the chart on the right, fundamentally, this is about connectivity is about data in motion. It's about moving data from one place to another. And as we are looking to move data from one place to another, we're looking to create data, to connect data, to contextualize it. And there are a variety of endpoints that need this data to move from one place to another: people, processes, things, and applications. And what is the reason that we're doing this? It's to enable business continuity and reliability. It's to get real-time insights, to support pervasive digital experiences. And so that's how we think about the future of connectivity and how we would encourage the market to think about fundamentally what connectivity is. And the network is a core enabler of that connectivity. And so if you think about using technologies like cloud and enabling mobility and using ML and AI, these are all require a scalable and efficient network to be able to use those technologies. But there are challenges that organizations have in supporting this data in motion and the future of connectivity. There are more users and devices than ever on the network. There are more high bandwidth applications, such as the video traffic that we're using today. And there's this expectation of low latency. So that network has to be able to support more users and devices accessing higher bandwidth applications and supporting lower latency connections. It's challenging. And then you add on top of it the COVID pandemic that we went through last year, and organizations had to rapidly shift their focus last year to, now I have all these challenges in my network, and now I have to support remote workers and enable my connectivity to support those remote workers as well. And so that's where we saw these branch of one architectures come about. And the next slide talks about what we really saw from a workforce realignment standpoint. This was a survey data question that we did in December of US enterprises, asking where folks are working. And basically before COVID, folks told us that about 38% of their workers had a flexible or hybrid work arrangement or were working remotely full-time. So that means that they had to support those remote workers in one way or another, whether they were full-time or part-time remote. During the throes of COVID in December of 2020, that number increased to more than 70% of workers working remotely. And then we also asked, how is this going to change in a post-COVID world? And what are some of the long-term impacts that we're going to have from COVID? And that's where folks said that more than half of their employees are going to be working remotely, either full-time or part of the time. And I just love this quote from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, that we saw 2 years worth of digital transformation in just 2 months last year. And I think this workforce realignment really shows that organizations had to rapidly shift their priorities to support these remote workers. And the key here is that, strategies can be put in place now to continue to support these remote workers. Maybe there were some Band-Aid solutions that were put into place last year, but now is a time, as we're starting to welcome folks back into the office, it's a time to think about, what are my strategic investments I need to make? How do I really want to set my network up and my organization up to ensure that I can support the remote workers and also folks who are coming back into the office? And so the next slide talks about some of the attributes of a branch of one edge network. So again, branch of one is this idea of an architecture that extends enterprise class networks to remote and mobile employees. And the chart on the right shows some of the components, the key attributes based on survey data that folks believe are important for a branch of one architecture. So as organizations are looking to support these remote workers in an efficient, secure, scalable way, what are some of the tools that they're looking for that branch of one architecture to have? And our survey data shows that a cloud-based platform for centrally managing these enterprise network policies, both for in-person and remote workers, was important. Having client-based security access, like VPN, was important for a branch of one architecture. Having centralized security platforms, such as a next-gen firewall or a cloud access security broker, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, that was important for folks. Having visibility and analytics tools for monitoring the application and user experience. I think this is key, because it's not just about enabling connectivity for folks. It's about enabling a good quality experience for folks, both users and applications and devices. Everything that's connected to that network should have a good experience on that network. And how do you know if they're having a good experience unless you have tools to be able to get visibility into the performance of the network, into the monitoring of that application and user experience? So again, these are some of the tools that we saw organizations prioritizing in a branch of one architecture. And I think these also speak to some of the tools that we see organizations making in some of the targeted investments that we talked about that organizations are looking to make now. So finally, I think the last slide I have is around the sort of spectrum of solutions that we see organizations rolling out for branch of one architectures for supporting remote workers. And the point of this slide is that it's not a one size fits all. And I think we're going to talk about with our panelists today that it's going to be a hybrid world, right? We're going to have folks in the office. We're going to have folks working remotely. We're going to have applications hosted on premise. We're going to have applications hosted in the cloud. And so it really requires organizations to think about different solutions for different use cases. And this slide talks about some of the different personas of remote workers and maybe what they need. So on the far left-hand side, what we call knowledge workers. These are sort of the vast swath of workers, of remote workers that we would see. Not everyone needs a hardened appliance, for example. Maybe there's just a soft client VPN that's needed to support these workers. Maybe it's an optimized app for ensuring connectivity to a cloud gateway, or maybe it's augmenting broadband connectivity. Maybe there's a second set of workers in the middle here. These are maybe developers or call center workers, this sort of class of workers. Maybe they need a slightly more firmed up solution for the branch of one. And this is where we see organizations maybe rolling out a Wi-Fi access point or an LTE router to augment connectivity. And so that's sort of a small appliance that we may see. And then there's this set of workers who throughout the last year and a half, this is workers who, connectivity failure is not an option for these workers. So if you think about executives, if you think about in finance, in legal, in healthcare, this is where organizations have folks who, you really don't want the network to go down when they're in online meetings or doing their work. And so that's where we see more hardened network or security appliances being rolled out, such as an SD-WAN gateway or a firewall appliance, something like that. And then across all of these solutions, there are some capabilities that we think are important. Access to collaboration applications. I think we're all, we don't need to tell anyone here how many Zoom and WebEx and Teams meetings we have nowadays. So having access to those, supporting those, having centralized cloud access application, access to cloud-based applications, we believe is important. And then having a centralized management platform for managing that access, the network, and the security coming together, we think is important across all three of these. So again, this is how I've thought about where enterprises have been over the last year and a half, where we see enterprises wanting to make investments, and what some of those investments are that we see enterprises making. But that's really just my opinion. I want to hear from our panelists of what they are doing and what they are seeing in this landscape today. So I want to start by asking each of our panelists to quickly introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about your organization that you work for and your role specifically within that organization. And then we'll get into some of the meaty questions here. So Samantha, welcome to the panel. Can you say a quick hello?
Thanks, Brandon. Sure. So hi, I'm Samantha Davis. I'm the CIO of Americas for Arkema. Arkema is a global chemical company that's headquartered in France, and our US office is just outside of Philadelphia in King of Prussia. So for the pandemic, the thing that we really learned is how quickly we are able to adapt. We have a very intentional and strategic path forward with our digital transformation and our move to the cloud. And it was really amazing to see how quickly we can move with that and enable the tools that our workers needed to be able to be effective and productive.
Excellent. Yeah, I look forward to hearing about that. Mark, welcome to the panel. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Hello, everybody. Mark Parr. I'm the Global Director of IT at HFW. HFW is a sector-focused global law firm, so we 600 lawyers supporting clients across the world with a footprint across the major regions. And really for us, it's about how do we provide that creative and pragmatic support to our clients to just think differently about how we might provide that solution. And as head of technology for the firm, really it's about how do I ensure that my peers, my colleagues, that they have access to the tools and the systems they need, but also how do we think creatively about technology to our clients and providing embedded technology that means that we are closer to our clients and we're able to draw them into our ecosystem.
Great. Yeah, I think you'll have some great insights for this panel. Gaurav, welcome to the panel. Can you say a quick hello?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Thank you for having me on the panel. It's an honor to be with this crew. So this is Gaurav Anand. I am the Vice President and on the board of Tata Communications Americas. We are a global ecosystem, digital ecosystem enabler for multinational corporations. I've been with the company for about 2 decades, working on mostly enterprise transformations as enterprises go through, the networking, unified collaborations, mobility, and their migration to the cloud. So happy to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks. And Ian, welcome to the panel. Thanks for joining us today. Can you say a quick hello?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the opportunity. Ian Wood, I look after or head the technology areas for an organization called Veritas. Veritas is a global software organization where we assist many organizations globally to protect their data, to make their critical workloads available no matter where they reside, and to provide unique insights to data in this changing world. We've been doing that at Veritas for 3 decades, of which 2 decades I've been working at Veritas, specializing on data management and data protection.
Great. Excellent. I think we'll have great perspective here, both on the end user side and then folks who are working with a number of end users. So we'll get some really great perspective. So we're going to break this conversation up into 3 major topic areas. And basically, it's where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And so I wanted to start to talk a little bit about what the last 1.5 years has been like for organizations. And we have some great experts who can help us with that. So maybe Samantha, if you could talk a little bit more about what changes your organization had to put into place last year. When COVID started, what did that look like for your organization?
Yeah, so we really weren't near as remote as a lot of companies. So we really obviously accelerated that. Being a chemical company, we have R&D facilities, so we still had some that were essential and had to be in an office, but yet the large majority was remote. So we really had to look at our VPN and how do we extend that and how do we ensure that end user is essentially like they're in the office, right? So how do we extend that security and really start with a mindset shift, whereas before you're designing and building with the assumption that people are in the office. Now you're designing and building with them being remote. And it's really, truly, like I said, it's a mindset shift. And you're just reminding yourself, okay, wait a minute, we have to think about this, or we have to think about that. But, and one of the other things that we did was around the tools. So whereas before you may have had tools for virtual meetings, but maybe the usage wasn't quite where you wanted it. So we developed some positions called usage coaches. And these folks are great with the tools and they're great with people. And they really help them learn how to use the nuances of the tools and increase adoption overall. And what we saw with that was just an accelerated growth and understanding of how to use the tool. So we didn't have as many requests for information of the how-to because we saw that adoption and the use accelerate.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think your story resonates with me based on what we heard from a lot of other organizations as well. Mark, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on that from a technology standpoint, from a security standpoint, from an operations standpoint. What has the last 1.5 years been like for your organization?
I think initially it felt as though we'd just gone into sort of business continuity, disaster recovery type mode. That kind of let's get everybody out of the office, let's get everybody connected, make sure people can get into the network and have access to the tools they need. And it probably took us 2 or 3 months to kind of get out of that mindset that actually this wasn't just going to be a moment in time that this was going to be an enduring sort of process and something we had to consider. And so we took the opportunity, really. We were aggressive with some of our technology deployments. So we talk about collaboration tools. We very quickly brought Microsoft Teams in far earlier than we'd ever planned, with a really to ensure that we gave everybody access to a tool that would give them collaboration video conferencing that they could use from home. But actually what we found by being really aggressive with that deployment is that the competency and the confidence of those tools allow us to think about how we might deploy future technologies and how we might be much more aggressive in the way that we're going to deliver future technology changes. We also took the opportunity, I guess, to really, we soft pedaled some of our projects. So some of those activities that we could push off to the right that we thought we needed to do first, we were able to soft pedal them and push them away, whereas we really dragged forward some of their other activities. So endpoint security was something that, I went from having 20 offices and maybe the odd remote worker into having 1,300 remote offices that I'm suddenly concerned about when I've got all these people sat in their, in their spare rooms working. So we really positioned our endpoint security a lot differently than we perhaps thought we were going to. And really, the biggest change that this has allowed me is to think about, and you talked about it, Brandon, at the start, the personas that we're now seeing, the fact that people are going to work in different ways, and everybody will be slightly different. So how do I now prepare the firm for work anywhere? And then when I talk about work anywhere, it's underpinned with the protect everywhere. So ensuring that people, regardless of how they work, where they work, when they work, have the same level of access to the systems, the data, the network, regardless, and ensuring that we have that equity of sort of deliverable across the whole estate. And that's probably been the most exciting thing that we've thought about here, is actually we're not going to direct people that you need to be in the office because that's where you're going to see better bandwidth. We're going to say, here's the tools and the systems that are in place to support you. You determine where you're going to access them. And as long as I'm confident the security wrappers around that and you've got the access you need, then we can start to just think a bit differently about what that looks like.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's a lot to unpack there that we can get to later in the conversation. Gaurav, I'd be interested in your perspective, sort of taking a step back from the many enterprises that you see and work with. What are some themes that you've seen over the last year and a half that sort of are indicative of where enterprises have been and what they've had to go through?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So I think even from our own perspective, if I start there, I mean, we were about 5% work from home, and we went to 95% work from home in the course of about a couple of days, literally. So the first response, and it is sort of the same across the board, because not only are we serving ourselves, but by the nature of the business we're in, we're actually supporting our customers. So we had to keep the customers who were then going remote also be able to stay up. So as the service that we provide for the connectivity perspective. So the first reaction obviously was how do you respond to this change? How do you kind of come up with the technologies and the systems you're going to put in place quickly, and then how do we sort of step in from our perspective? I think one of the biggest sort of the swells we saw was folks looking for substitute for the VPN access, right? Because they had limitations and how many people could access, and then there was obviously security concerns and quality concerns, because when people went remote, they didn't lower their expectations on what their experience needed to be. They wanted to, and I think from the IT side too, they wanted at least to get to that level of, hey, we're going to be able to provide that same level of service. We want to get to that level of service, as Mark was just saying, as if they're in the office, right? So it took a little bit of, after that response piece of like, oh, now what are we going to do, to then an adaptation piece, right? or adapting phase. And a lot of folks adapted. I think there are a lot of zero trust, network access solutions that were out there sort of emerged in a way to substitute that VPN access. So I know there's a lot of collaboration platforms that kind of exploded as well, if that's the right word. Teams or Zoom or what have you. But along with that, the access requirements where the security became a key element, where it was in the past, or even in the VPN state, it's almost like you're in the office. So if you're there, you're a known person, therefore you have access. It's based on your IP address, it's based on your network location, etc. Whereas there was a lot of concern if there's private access to data that's proprietary, etc. needed to be at an application level, that security needed to be added. And that's where sort of the zero trust network access solution sort of came into play. And I think the other thing, which is kind of maybe on the lighter side of things, was video kind of became really big, and that brings its own set of challenges in terms of the quality and etiquette, I guess. but with the video piece, I think it wasn't just the collaboration internally, but also with your clients, the customer experience, a lot of that move to video and then to these collaboration platforms also then kind of created this whole omni-channel experience, creating, that quick move we felt from a contact center perspective too. Folks were kind of wanting to move to the cloud as soon as possible because, on-premise was just not cutting it. So in a lot of ways, I've heard you mentioned Satya's comment, or you listed Satya's comment there about 2 years and 2 months. I've heard more than that. I've heard 6 years in this space, right? So a lot of stuff is happening, and I think now we're at a stage. So we've gone from responding to adapting to where I think we're now in that thriving stage, where we've kind of had that luxury to make some bold decisions because you kind of had to, you were kind of forced to, which was an accelerant. But now we've kind of gone to a different trajectory. So, when I see you flatten the curve, I'm almost thinking that, that curve was not only flattened, but when it comes back up on the inflection point, I think it's going to be on the higher side than where it first started. Just if you think of in terms of, digitization and so on. Sure. So it was a very, very interesting phenomenon, and I don't think it's over yet. I think there's a lot still going on, and there's a lot of, you mentioned there's a lot of sort of hybrid, not only hybrid, and I'll stop here in a second here. I see hybrid not only from each sort of company perspective or even from a vertical perspective. I see hybrid even geographically. Companies reacted differently in different regions, and could be for various reasons. Could be just access, even, the internet, like I always say, is not always created equal. So the security challenges are different in different regions. Compliance issues are different. So it's interesting times ahead. I'm really looking forward to where we head to this next normal. It'll be quite interesting.
Yeah, no, well said. And yeah, I agree. I think technology can help us sort of come back even higher on that other side of the curve. Right. There, I agree. Yeah. Ian, we've talked a little bit about security here. I'd be interested in your perspective on how you're thinking about ensuring not just connectivity but secure connectivity, and making sure that wherever folks are working, that they're doing so securely. How do you think about that in the context of what we've seen in the last year and a half?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I think I'd add on to everything said. Mark, Samantha, Gaurav said there. We saw very similar perspectives in the digital transformation. And I think what was really interesting in the early stages, and what we noticed, is that the starting point for organizations is very different, depending on the organization. It could also be the geography and the internet connectivity. But we had a stark differences between organizations, let's say in the tech space, where we're pretty used to working from home, pretty used to remote connectivity, living on these endless team type calls or Zoom calls, through to organizations like I met last week, where they're a trading house, where they're very traditional, super secure. They have 100% work from the office mindset prior to COVID. So the starting point of a tech company in this transformation versus the starting point of a trading house, of very traditional, very secure, is at a different point. But nonetheless, everybody went through a massive digital transformation, very rapid, as we've all said. And what we noticed is that digital transformation in most organizations had a big risk of outstripping their ability to be secure and their ability to be resilient. And in essence, we saw a very simple resiliency gap, thinking of the digital transformation happening at pace and the added complexity being increased in any organization, whether that's adopting new technology, whether that's accelerating the cloud and collaboration platforms. It created this gap. And I think what we've noticed now is organizations are looking at, they've moved from almost survival mode, and I guess necessity perhaps, it becomes now the mother of opportunity or the mother of innovation, right? As they've moved from survival, they're now looking at making sure that their systems are secure. There are a lot of conversations that we're having around organizations making sure their systems are compliant, at least where I live in the UK, especially where you've moved from doing business and collaboration in traditional ways into instant messaging, into almost survival mode of doing business. They're now making sure that that can be compliant and looking at where that can become opportunity through this innovation. We've changed the way in which we work. We've changed the way in which we engage with our audiences and our customers. How do we make sure that that can now take us to the new level of innovation and be secure no matter where the data resides? And there's a big backdrop, of course, of what we've noticed, the backdrop of things like ransomware attacks up 150% since the pandemic. And ultimately, organizations are looking very, very quickly at how can they reduce their complexity? How can they be more secure against ransomware? And a lot of the conversations, how can they actually be resilient against ransomware? With ransomware attacks being so on the increase, there's almost a sense of inevitability that unfortunately you'll be infected. So a lot of the conversations we have is around bouncing back, that resiliency. How do we recover very, very quickly if a ransomware attack takes systems down or encrypts data? So those are the kind of areas we're talking about. Things like, how do we recover data rapidly in the event of a ransomware attack? How do we remain compliant using new forms of collaboration with our customers or their customers? So those are the areas. Hopefully that answers your question, Brandon.
Yeah, sure does.
If I could pick up on a point there, Ian, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think there's something here, isn't there, that says actually we provided a technology that's allowed us to sort of get into this brave new world of the way we're working, and we're providing the tools and the access. And actually, one of the things that I'm really keen with my team to push on is we've got a load of goodwill within the business now that says the technology works, trust the technology, it gives you the tools and the access you need. So actually, I'm going to leverage that goodwill to continue to drive some of these adoptions and to do them aggressively. So rather than absolutely, Gaurav, to your point around that curve peaking out higher at the end, as we come back out, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're probably all of the same mind where we're thinking, let's drive this now and use this as an opportunity, because actually what we're seeing is people's understanding of the technology and how it can help facilitate you working in a different way, allowing you to be more collaborative or being more innovative. How do we continue to drive that? And certainly what we're seeing across HFW with our clients is our clients having that expectation that we're going to take them on that journey with us. And that's the bit I think is really exciting, is being able to drag us all along on that journey. It says, this is a brave opportunity that allows us to really accelerate some of our thinking here and adopt tools and technology that perhaps we thought were 18 months, 2 years away, and really sort of capitalizing on that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said, Mark. I think it really is an opportunity for folks to rethink sort of what's been done. Some of that is by way of necessity, but I think there is an opportunity here to think about, from a strategic standpoint, what does my future state, what do I want that to look like? And what sort of technology do I need to support that? And Samantha, I'd be interested in your perspective on maybe some of the challenges as you're thinking about executing on this vision. And I'm thinking that maybe one of the challenges here isn't necessarily from a technology perspective, it's more sort of from the soft skills perspective and changing mindsets and making sure that people understand how to use these technologies and getting comfortable with them. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's both on the user side and then also on the technology side as we advance that platform. So we talked a little bit, right, about how do we have that training and that upskill to know the technology and what we have and what we need to use going forward so that we can enable that platform. But then also from that user, it will change, right? There's always new tools, there's always new products and add-ons and capabilities. So the more that we can get in front of that and be able to share that information, the better. One of the other things that I think with the pandemic is it removed some of our access to that end user. Whereas before we could go visit them, we could go sit with them and see how they worked. And it took a little bit of a little bit of that away. And now as we are able to travel more and go sit with them, I think that's an important aspect to put back into our work behaviors so that we can bring that back and ensure that our tools are meeting their needs as their needs are changing, especially due to this with a hybrid working environment. So I think that's really important to build that bridge back as we have these tools come out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Gaurav, I'd be interested in your perspective on sort of where we are now and what some of the top challenges that folks are thinking about, and specifically how folks can overcome some of those soft skill challenges that may be sort of holding people back from accelerating their DX as fast as maybe they wanted to.
Yeah, no. So I think one of the main things that I think is that the internet is causing a major disruption, right? And that's got nothing to do with the pandemic. I think it probably kept us or gave the benefit of the everything we just talked about was sort of facilitated by the internet. So that transformation was kind of sort of happening anyway, in my opinion, right? Where we were companies moving away from being site to site or from branch to data center and putting in SD-WAN in place. And some of that transformation was happening, moving to the cloud, right? All the applications were kind of moving to the edge, collecting data closer to the edge, et cetera. But what the pandemic did is it just kind of accelerated that move quite a bit. So I think where the challenge now comes in is that balance, right? So while the internet, allows you to, you don't have to rely on site to site, you just get a local broadband connection and you're just connecting to the cloud wherever you are, to put it simplistically. What that's done is while you get that agility and you get that flexibility, it exposes you, right? You still have that security, exposure, and now your security exposure is essentially the surface area of attack has increased, to the branch of one, so, and then of course there's a quality and the experience because the internet, quite frankly, is not created equal, right? And as we talked earlier, it's different in different parts of the world, and it's different in different times of the day, right? And so it has a lot of variability that sort of comes in. And of course, as more and more sort of applications are moving to the cloud, and as more and more of the sort of the experiences that we're giving to our customers are now more and more cloud-based and moving out to the edge, I think the challenges to security are becoming more and more profound, right? And how do you manage that? Because typically in the past, you had a defined perimeter and you had, your firewalls and, your DMZ and your VPN and whatnot. That's all changing as everything moves to the cloud. Your applications are there, your users are there. Your VPN only sort of gives you, connectivity to the cloud. Now the security is going to move to the cloud. Now it's almost like, security is kind of being dragged along like the tin can at the tied to the back of your car, right? But it needs to kind of jump in. It needs to be like right there in the driver's seat, if not the passenger seat, right? And be sort of integrated with that. And then that's not easy to do with a lot of clients. And I think so what we're kind of coming across to answer your question on, how do you bridge that capabilities gap that you sort of, the risks that you have for, deploying, managing, maintaining, is that a lot of companies are thinking about it as a service models, right? And then there are a lot of companies that are offering that, kind of that integrated network security and an internet sort of a based solution across the board. And I can tell you just one little tidbit of data that we're picking up more and more is we get access to a lot of RFPs as an example from different multinationals. It used to be that there would be one or two or three main regional MPLS providers across the globe. Lately, we've been receiving essentially, RFPs that are essentially saying we're going to get rid of the entire MPLS network and we're going entirely to the internet. So it's it's a combination then. Okay, well, what type of internet do you want to go to? So there's a lot of good discussion, and I don't want to hog the airwaves here, but where we are kind of sort of at this stage is there's going to be some hybrid, not only from what we said earlier in terms of the adoption, the rollout, the investments, but there's also going to be hybrid in the way networks are rolled out. The next normal, as you mentioned in your data, 50-some% or 53% are going to be hybrid. That's the average. There are some companies that are going to be much below that, and some much higher. But whatever it is, there's still that component that's going to have the requirement to be sort of in that traditional space. Yeah, and want my proprietary data to be secure, only access through these private links, and so on and so forth. So having that ability to kind of manage that integrated sort of play, and I'm referring right now just the data part, but I think it applies also to the collaboration contact center space. That integrated offering on a global basis kind of lends itself to a little bit of a as a service type model, at least for from a design and kind of the rollout stage, and then maybe life cycle becomes another story. But it's again not a one size fits all story. I think the different companies are at a different level and then different parts of the spectrum there, in my opinion.
I think one of the biggest considerations when we talk about that X as a service, Gaurav, and it's something we're looking at the moment, is changing the way that you budget and changing the way that you spend your IT budget. So that CapEx versus OpEx. I think that's a really key part of that conversation, and how that impacts on an organization as it considers what how it structures itself for the future. One of the points you raised there I find really interesting when you talked about security. I think one of the biggest things when we look at sort of those three lines of defense are the people and the part that they play. And previously we would have put this sort of really hardened wrapper around them and said, it's fine, they're in the office, they can't do any damage. And if they print something, they've printed it in the office and we can capture it. The reality is now we're seeing their role to play is quite a bit different from what we're used to. And one of the things that strikes me the most is I never ever thought I'd be giving advice to someone about, if you've got your voice activated device in your study where you're working, have you turned that off when you're having those board conversations where you might be, or having a client conversation that is secure, and you've got your Alexa or your Siri device sat in the corner sort of polling away. And I never ever imagined that my job as a sort of CIO would be to be giving that advice, but it's almost now, how far is the reach of my role? How far beyond my conventional role do I have to reach? And actually, one of the things we're really focusing on now is the people and the part that they have to play in this. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more around technology's role within well-being, but by people being more accessible and being online more, and we talk about a longer working day because we no longer commute and all these things, actually the impact of all that, does that sort of longer duration of being online lead to sloppier security standards because people start to get tired or they start to get too comfortable in the way they're operating, and how you think about that? So that's one of those security challenges that perhaps we hadn't considered before, because we would have said, well, there's a hardened layer. And now you've got to say, well, actually, are people infiltrating data from my network or data loss? Is it going in a different way than it might have before? And how do we think about that and capture it? Because you absolutely want to make sure that you're giving people the access they need. They need the data. Let them work in a way that suits them, so they've got agility and flexibility. But equally, how do I secure the data that we've got in a network and make sure that it isn't going to places it shouldn't?
Yeah, Mark, I think you articulated that really well in terms of the challenge that I think a lot of organizations are facing. And Ian, I'd be interested in your perspective on this. If I boil it down, it's like security and performance and enabling connectivity, but in a secure way. How do you think about balancing those things?
Yeah, I was actually going to build quickly on Mark's point there. I wondered if you see the opposite on the horizon. Think of the UK as we are easing things and restrictions are easing. We're moving more to a hybrid model generally. Employees, have we over-rotated to too much work from home security? And is there a risk that we've neglected the work from office security? And I think of just myself, it's been so long since I've been on a plane with my laptop. That's what I did. I climbed on planes, flew around, and is there a risk of other employees getting slack? You can imagine laptops being left on planes because they just haven't got that organizational memory of picking laptops up and moving them around, or even the other areas of your data that is being remote at home. We're bringing those devices back into the office with a different security lens. So I wondered, Mark, if you had a thought around that. Sorry to come back to you, Brandon. I'll come back to answer your question.
No worries. Yeah, it's a good question.
It's a really good question. You're absolutely right. And I'm always minded at a sort of post-Christmas party when you have to know which of the bars you're going to go to the day after to collect the laptops that have been left behind, right? It's that sort of moment, isn't it? But you're absolutely right. I think so. For me, the focus has been around the model now is work anywhere. So when we talk about protecting our data, it's around people operating regardless of whether they're at home, in a coffee shop, in an airport lounge, and thinking like that, really. And I think for us, that's been the lens, has been around with an eye on what the future workplace is going to look like. It's a really interesting challenge. If I look at our global footprint in the Asia Pac region, we're seeing that predominantly the offices being fully occupied. And yet then I look at London, and I look in Houston, our offices there, and you'd say actually they're probably at about 12%, 15% of occupancy. So seeing quite a difference across the whole scale, and that's proving really challenging, because exactly to your point, there is a different expectation when you go in the office, and there's slightly different requirements. I'm in the office today, and I'm in London, and what took me today is how many people walking around with masks on. That's great, but how many people have forgotten to put their lanyard with their staff ID on? Yeah. And it's those subtle changes that you think, blimey, that we're going to have to really sort of work our way through that, to really make sure that we continue with the sort of cadence of education that says you are going to operate in a different way, but you've got your part to play in this. It is, you are part of the lines of defense when we think about securing the firm.
Good. And Brandon, coming back to your question around, I guess, the trade-off of performance and security, I think one of the big things on the horizon is, as we move back to hopefully more normality, there's probably a lot of work to be done in standardizing on tool sets, either that on collaboration tool sets, that on security tool sets, because there's the risk that many organizations we've seen have over-rotated at a need of necessity to get the business up and running. And therefore, there's adoption of many tools, whether that's adoption in cloud. What we see is the risk of organizations deploying multi-cloud, different cloud elements, choosing the right cloud fit, but then not standardizing on data management or data security tool sets. And therefore, every cloud that they potentially have deployed in necessity comes with it its own complexity if they deploy a tool for that. And therefore, perhaps the next step to try and balance the performance and security will be a big consolidation exercise. Things I did 20 years ago in my career in data center consolidation. There's probably a lot of consolidation in security tools, consolidation in collaboration tools. How many collaboration tools are they using? Do they really need all of that? And then looking at how that supports this hybrid model to balance that sort of performance and security model.
Yeah, and Samantha, I'd be interested in your perspective on how you're thinking about securely enabling that connectivity. And then maybe if you could also touch on, Mark shared sort of what he's seen in terms of folks coming back to the office. As we think about sort of where do we go from here and sort of the future state, what does that look like for your organization in terms of welcoming folks back, and what sort of timeline that'll look like?
Yeah, sure. So I was going to add on to what Ian talked about, right? When you do go so fast and you have so many things happening in parallel, you can end up with some redundant tools. And one of those things, right, as you're putting them in, is that intentional training for your team members from a technology perspective, so they really understand all of the things that the tools that we've invested in can do. Right, so that they become experts in it, but that takes time. So you have to have the learning while you're having the implementation, and really allow, from a leadership standpoint, allow them time to learn and engage with the vendor to really give them access to the knowledge of how other people are using the tools, what are the challenges, and really teach the vendor what our challenges are so that we can move that forward and really use the tools to the best of our advantage and not have too much duplication, because then you're having to manage all of those as well, not just pay for them. And then from a standpoint of what it looks like, we will start going back into the office from a hybrid perspective. And like Mark, we're global, so we operate in 55 countries. From an IT perspective, our main offices are in Asia and Europe and in the US, and it's different everywhere. So what we see in Asia is similar to what Mark talked about. The majority of our staff are in the office. With Europe, they're coming back, right? So 1 to 2 days a week. And in the US, we'll start going back in the fall. And it'll be a complete hybrid, and there's not necessarily a set rule, right? It could be that it's 2 days a week, it could be that it's 3, it could be that it's 3 days a month. It really depends on what that role is and what the needs are. But again, that means that we have to look and continue to look at our security and our network platforms and how we're advancing them, because it will continue to be an end user that is remote. And like I talked about before, just designing for that and not designing from an office mindset that the end user is going to be anywhere, right? So like Gaurav talked about, the zero trust and always on VPN. What are those options? What can we do to ensure the security of the environment?
Mark, I'd be interested in your perspective on that sort of future state. You know, as you do look towards the future, what do you see as the most important keys to successfully executing on your vision to, you know, enable the productivity of those workers, to do so in a secure way, to have the technology that's needed to do that? How do you think about that?
I think Samantha touched on it earlier. It's that use case requirement. So one of the things I'm really conscious of is it's not all my good ideas, and it's not technology wagging the business dog. You know, it's ensuring that I'm listening to what my colleagues are saying and what their requirements are. So that real sort of, I'm always conscious that I shouldn't be a vendor reseller. So if I see a really good tool that I might think might be useful, then I've got to make sure I find the right people in the business to demonstrate it to, understand their use cases, and then determine if it is appropriate. Actually, we took the opportunity early into our pandemic response to remove a load of technology that was just sat redundant, because it had been brought in. Somebody thought it would meet a use case, hadn't really articulated, hadn't sought adoption, hadn't gone through change management, and then it just sat there as a sort of limp tool hanging off the side of the network. So something we're really keen to drive now is ensuring that we've got a use case, that we're listening to what the business is saying, we're understanding what their problem is and therefore what their requirement is, and finding a solution that'll meet that. And I think that dialogue, certainly what I've noticed from the legal sector, is perhaps that dialogue between technology and the user hadn't always occurred and hadn't always sort of articulated properly what they were trying to achieve. So that's, for me, that's one of those fundamental things now that really ensures that if I'm spending the money of the firm, that I'm spending it wisely on tools that are required, not on tools that just feel like, you know, a good idea.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. And it's something that I say a lot is that, you know, think about the use cases. Don't just deploy technology for the sake of deploying technology. Have a reason for doing it. It's going to make the technology deployment so much easier. So, you know, with just a couple minutes left, I think it'd be great to get some final closing thoughts from the panel. So Ian, maybe we could start with you. You know, through this conversation, you know, what sticks out to you of things that we should be thinking about moving forward, and sort of leveraging the moment that we do have right now?
Yeah, Brandon, I think what I mentioned earlier is what we've seen is through necessity, we've gone and digitally transformed, or we've seen organizations digitally transform at a rapid rate. There's a risk that that's led to additional complexity. So my advice to organizations is to take stock, have a look at the technology they deployed, and to the point Mark raised earlier is see the fit for purpose of the use cases that they have, and ensure that they close what we see as a potential security and resiliency gap, to make sure that they can continue to drive the business in a secure and compliant manner. And I think what I would say is we've seen that through the pandemic, that necessity has become the mother of innovation. And there are fantastic areas of innovation we see in all sorts of organizations that have really driven the business change. And so there is I think out of all the difficult times we've had, there's been a real opportunity to innovate and for IT to shine. And now is an opportunity to continue to build on that.
Well said. Gaurav, any takeaways or closing thoughts?
Yes, so I think for me, it's not just rethinking remote. I think it's rethinking hybrid. I think we can no longer think of IT, and this might even just be a cliche at this stage. That as a cost center, IT is more of a innovation and growth tied with the business outcomes and sort of the expectations that this new digital competitive environment is creating, where they've got to come out, businesses have come out with I performance, faster transactions, new digital services, new revenue streams, right? So IT is an enabler in that sense. And I think I just do sort of quote from one of your colleagues from the IDC session we had a few weeks ago. Among other things, there were three things that I kind of took away. One was that enterprises are going to be spending 70% or more were saying that they're going to spend more on cybersecurity, zero trust, network access, SASE, those types of, sort of access infrastructure. There's going to be evolution of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. That's the coexistence of, and then there's obviously the branch level connectivity and sort of the SD-WAN and sort of the the distribution and the network of one, essentially that's going to be a challenge that everybody is going to need to be handled. So we have to strike that balance between agility and being fit for purpose, having open architectures, and security and stability, simplicity on the other hand. So it's no one for size fits all, but it is interesting times ahead for sure.
Certainly. Samantha, it sounds like a exciting time, but not one without its challenges as we navigate the coming months, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I think sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, what sort of takeaways do you have from this conversation?
Yeah, so I think we're all going through very similar challenges. I'm very optimistic as I hear about all the different changes that people have done and the ways that we're looking at things. I'm very optimistic when I look back and hear the examples that the panel gave, and then saw what we were able to do on how quickly we were able to move. And I think that's still something to celebrate. And like Mark talked about, that's where we now have that confidence of the business that, hey, we can enable this. We can give you the tools that you need to achieve your goals, right? And by leaning in, we can really help move the needle there. And then again, and we talked about it just a little bit, is that productivity factor of our folks. I do think before the pandemic, people thought that if you were remote, you weren't going to work very much, or you weren't going to have the same productivity. And what we saw, right, was extreme productivity. And some of that is people just learning how to work together in this different way. We saw more global interaction and inclusion because everybody had to be on a virtual collaboration tool. And then also, as we move forward, how do we ensure we keep that productivity? And like Mark talked about a little bit, and not lose that as people are now commuting, whereas, or will be commuting as now they're working their commute time. So those are, right, some of those things to factor in. But as I look forward, I just think there's great things ahead as we look at how quickly we were able to shift, and we can use that momentum going forward.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us should be proud of what we've been able to slog through in the last year and a half, if I can say that. Mark, some closing thoughts from you.
I think absolutely, let's celebrate the successes we've had, but now let's start to consider the wonderful opportunities that we've got. I mean, I talk to my team a lot about the brave new world that we're entering into, and how we can continue to build on the momentum and success we've already seen. One of the things it's a shame we didn't have a chance to talk more on the panel today, but around that sort of the impact of well-being from having too much technology, too much access to that constant video vibe, and I talk about the whiplash that I get from going from Zoom to Teams to WebEx all throughout my day. but really it's, I think it's changing the view of how IT was perceived. Technology is no longer just the enabler, it's a business partner. And it's driving that, I've got a seat at the table that says, if we're talking about the strategy of the firm and the business and the direction we want to go in, how is technology playing a part in that? And I think that's something I'm really keen to continue to unlock during my tenure.
Great. I want to thank all of our panelists, Samantha, Mark, Gaurav, Ian. I think we got some really great insights here on what the last year and a half has been like, where we are now, some of the keys to success in the future. Really great insights from everyone. So thank you to all my panelists. So thanks to everyone. And I'll hand it back to the NetEvents team.